Think about the last news anchor you watched regularly, the face you trusted to tell you what happened overnight, the voice that was just there, every morning, every evening, part of the furniture of your day. Now think about what happened when they were gone. Not retired, not pursuing other opportunities, with a smile and a cake. Just gone, replaced. The show continuing the next morning like nothing had changed. Television is brutally good at that. Filling the space, making sure you never have to sit with the absence for too long. But the person sitting on the other side of the camera, they have to sit with it. This video is about 7 of those people. What happened to them, what they did next, and what it actually looks like to fall from one of the most visible jobs in America. Because some of these stories end in places that would genuinely surprise you. A retail job in Chicago, a Hamptons property and a new life in New Zealand, a Substack with 110,000 readers, an essay 3 years in the making, and one story, told honestly, that started with a lie about a computer and ended with nearly a decade of drinking in a city where nobody knew who he was. 7 anchors. 7 very different kinds of disappearing. Let's get into it. Anchor spent 15 years at NBC, building a reputation that most journalists would consider a complete career on its own. She wasn't a performer playing a journalist. She was a journalist, one who happened to be exceptionally good on camera, international stories, humanitarian crises, breaking news in difficult places. She covered all of it with the sincerity that her audience genuinely responded to. In 2011, she was elevated to co-host of The Today Show alongside Matt Lauer. One of the most prominent seats in morning television, she lasted 1 year. NBC removed her from that chair in June 2012 in a way that the industry found widely uncomfortable. According to people inside the network, the issue had very little to do with Anne's performance. The issue was Matt Lauer. He reportedly was not happy with the pairing. And at NBC in that era, Lauer's opinion carried the kind of weight that could end a co-anchor's tenure regardless of what the ratings said. Anne said her goodbye on air, visibly emotional. Difficult to watch. Many viewers found it difficult to watch with her. NBC kept her on as a correspondent, framed publicly as a continuation, quietly understood inside the building as a diminishment. The assignments she got in that role never matched what she'd been doing before. By 2015, she was gone from the network entirely. Since then, she's hosted documentary series, PBS, TNT, meaningful work that never rebuilt the scale of daily audience she'd spent 15 years creating. She has said she'd return to morning television if the right opportunity came. As of 2026, it hasn't. What sets her apart from every other person on this list is the specific nature of what happened to her. She didn't make a mistake. She didn't lie. She didn't behave badly. She was simply on the wrong side of a power dynamic, and a career built across 15 years absorbed that consequence on behalf of someone else's preference. When Brian Williams took over NBC Nightly News from Tom Brokaw in 2004, that transition could have gone badly. Instead, he built it into the most watched evening news broadcast in America and held it there for a decade. His authority on camera was real, the dry humor, the credibility, the particular quality of seeming like the most trusted adult in the room. Then, in February 2015, something unraveled. Williams had told a story multiple times about his helicopter being forced down under fire during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Veterans who had actually been there pushed back publicly. He had not been on that helicopter. He had been on a different aircraft that arrived at the scene afterward. The distinction mattered enormously in his business. In journalism, the product is credibility, not talent, not charisma, credibility. And the moment credibility becomes a question, it becomes the only question. NBC suspended him for 6 months without pay while they reviewed his reporting. During that review, additional questions surfaced about his Hurricane Katrina coverage, claims about what he'd witnessed that others who were present disputed. He did not return to the anchor desk. NBC moved him to MSNBC to complete his contract. He hosted a late-night program there that found some audience but never the cultural footprint of what he'd commanded on the evening news. His contract ran out in 2021. Since then, and this is the part that surprises people, he has not disappeared. He has worked as a volunteer firefighter in New Jersey, which is a genuine commitment, not a media rehabilitation stunt. He hosted an election night special for Prime Video in 2024. In April 2026, Netflix announced a podcast project with him. His story is unusual on this list because the fall was self-inflicted, but not through cruelty or recklessness toward others. He told a story about himself that wasn't accurate. In the business of journalism, that distinction carries no protection at all. For 20 years, Matt Lauer was one of the most familiar faces in American television. Not famous in the celebrity sense. Familiar. There every weekday morning. A presence so consistent, it felt like part of the architecture of people's routines. In November 2017, NBC fired him within 24 hours of receiving a formal complaint. His co-anchors had to address his termination live on the same show he had anchored for 2 decades. The discomfort of that broadcast was visible to everyone watching. More complaints followed from other women after the initial story broke. Lauer maintained the relationships had been consensual. The accounts that were reported describe something more than that defense covered. What happened after the firing is its own kind of story. He wasn't photographed publicly for nearly 2 years. Reports described him in the Hamptons, withdrawn from the social world he'd been part of, cut off from most former colleagues, occupying the kind of silence that comes when there is simply nowhere to return to. By 2023, his personal life had reportedly stabilized. He had maintained a relationship with his children. He was spending time in New Zealand with a girlfriend he'd been dating since 2019. His professional life has not recovered in any visible way. No television, no media project, no public platform of any kind. On this list, he represents the most complete professional disappearance. And unlike some of the others, given what was reported about his conduct, that outcome has not generated much public sympathy. Charlie Rose spent more than 2 decades building something rare in television, a conversation program that actually trusted its audience. His PBS show was nightly, serious, unhurried. The biggest figures in politics, business, literature, and science. Talking in depth without the noise that most television formats can't resist adding. He also co-anchored CBS This Morning, which gave him a mainstream morning audience alongside his late-night public broadcasting presence. By 2017, he was one of the most prominent journalists on American television. In November of that year, The Washington Post published an investigation. 8 women described inappropriate behavior from Rose, unwanted touching, exposure, more serious conduct. CBS, PBS, and Bloomberg all terminated their relationships with him within days. More women came forward as the story spread. Eventually, the number exceeded 30. Rose acknowledged in a statement that some accounts were accurate while disputing others. The industry did not wait for the nuance to settle. His programs were pulled, his contracts ended. The reputation he had built across decades was dismantled in a matter of weeks. Reports from early 2018 placed him at his Long Island home, avoiding his neighbors, fishing, playing tennis, withdrawn from almost everything. He has made attempts to continue working. Occasional interviews posted to his personal website, including a conversation with Warren Buffett in 2022. But the reach of that work is a fraction of what he commanded when major broadcast partners were behind him. No network has brought him back in any capacity. His story represents one of the most complete professional endings on this list, primarily because the conduct documented against him was extensive, involved multiple workplaces, and spanned a long period of time. 7 anchors, 7 exits, 7 very different versions of what comes next. One disappeared quietly into a life in New Zealand. One told a lie about a computer and spent a decade in retail in Chicago. One waited 3 years to say what actually happened. One said exactly what he thought on purpose and refused to apologize for it. One was removed not for anything she did, but for who sat next to her. One got a Netflix podcast. One has nowhere left to go. What strikes me most about these stories, having looked at all of them together, is how little the television screen prepares you for what happens when it turns off. These were people whose entire professional identity was built on being seen, on being trusted, on showing up in the same place at the same time with the same voice every single day. And then one day, through a mistake or a misconduct investigation or an internal power dynamic or a tweet posted at the wrong hour, that ended. What you do with the absence is the story nobody talks about. The ones who rebuilt something rebuilt it slowly, without the infrastructure of a major network behind them, for audiences that were smaller but chose to be there. The ones who disappeared for different reasons. But none of them had a plan for this. Nobody really does. If you made it to the end of this, drop a comment. Which of these stories surprised you most? Subscribe if you're new. See you next time.